loss. Weight loss is so personal for people, but you can still find a program that works for you. And there are programs and steps that you can take that will dramatically increase your success. And so I'm thrilled to be here to share some thoughts around what people can do around the holidays to make them less painful and more joyful.
Awesome. Thank you, Kelli. It's a pleasure to have you here to really be able to focus on some of these things with holidays, and hopefully you'll be able to answer some of those questions that were popping up earlier.
Yeah. So I saw the question about how to tackle the holidays, and you mentioned it as well, having a plan. When I talk to people, what's your plan for grief recovery? I've yet to find a person who says, well, this is my plan. For some reason, we feel when it comes to grief, like if we just wait, time will heal all wounds, which isn't true. We just sort of let grief happen to us, and it comes, and then we deal with it as best we can when it shows up, and it tosses us around. But like anything else, having a plan ahead of time and taking consistent intentional actions is the key to succeeding. That's our approach we take with our health. That's our approach we take with finances. Like that's our approach that we take to solving just about any other problem. So I don't know why we feel like grief is different. So the first best thing you can do for the holidays is have a plan. Sit down and think for yourself what feels life-giving, what feels restful, what feels appropriate. A lot of the work that I do with people is just giving them permission to do what's best for them, helping them to think through what that looks like, and then having the tough conversations, or maybe the easy conversations of advocating for yourself what you need this holiday season. The other thing I really want to encourage people is that this is a season. It's not a sentence. So holidays are going to look different year to year, and they may be good and some may be harder. So don't get in this fixed mindset that it's always going to be hard or it's always going to be one way. So as you sit down to plan out your holiday season, or your plan for the rest of this month or going into the new year, keep that it's a temporary plan. You're going to plan for what's best for you right now. And when I work with clients, I always recommend, and actually this is a lifelong practice that I now do, every 3 months, I go through this process for myself, because whether you're grieving or not, to take a look at what is serving you in this season and what is not serving you in this season is just a good idea. And we've all learned as we're grieving, your emotional energy is a finite resource. You only have so much emotional energy in the tank, and you need a lot of emotional energy to even deal with grief, to get out of bed, to do the basics. So you need to be very mindful and manage your emotional energy, just like you would manage financial resources or anything else. So with that in mind, I want to give you permission to unashamedly set a plan that works for you. So if that means, and the very first Christmas after I lost my mom and my son, I did nothing for Christmas. I ate ice cream and went to the beach. And that's what was right for me that first year. Like if Christmas was like offensive to me the first year, because my mom was very much a Christmas person, and it was just really hard, and it felt really empty and really broken. And so for me, that first year was literally eating ice cream and going to the beach. So if that's where you're at, then that's okay. Do that and honor that that's what you're doing for the sake of healing and recovery. I'm happy to report that the very next year, I was able to decorate a Christmas tree, which I didn't even know. My mom had apparently she bought Christmas ornaments for our kids their whole lives. And I never even knew this until she passed away. So when she passed away, we got these buckets of Christmas ornaments for each of our kids. So the following year, I set up a tree and filled it all with ornaments for my son, Quintin, who had passed away, and my daughter, Piper, who's still here with us. And it was very sweet and I felt so close to my mom and so close to Quintin by doing that. So I just want to instill the hope that if this holidays feels so hard, that it may not feel that way next year. And actually, I can guarantee if you take intentional steps to actively work on your grief recovery, I can guarantee you that it won't feel that way next year. So have hope that this isn't a permanent thing. But what we want to talk about is there's kind of 3 levels. You want to pay attention to the things that you need to reduce, the things you need to completely remove, and then the things you need to increase. Because boundaries and a good plan isn't just about eliminating things, it's about increasing the helpful things as well. So like, and again, if you were doing a diet analogy, it's not enough to remove the bad foods. You have to also include good foods and positive habits. And so we want to take that same approach. So one thing might be reduce the number of social engagements that you commit to. Be very protective of your schedule. Give yourself more margin than you think you need so that you can get adequate rest. Remember, I equate loss like going through major surgery or a major car accident. Like it's a trauma. And so if you had major surgery, you wouldn't expect to just hop up and do life like normal. Like, no, you would recognize you're in a recovery season and you would plan accordingly. And this is no different. So give yourself room and space. Maybe the number of things you're going to commit to is on that reduced thing. Maybe the amount of, if you're used to hosting, maybe this year, you decide hosting isn't the best thing for you. If the holidays are painful and it's tied to painful memories and you're just not feeling up to do that, then completely don't feel obligated to put up a tree or put up stockings or put up things that are going to be triggering or upsetting for you. Again, like what I work with clients to do, especially in the beginning, is remove as many of the triggering things that we can. We can't guarantee that we'll never be triggered, but if we know that there are certain things that trigger us and upset us, we can absolutely remove as many of those as possible so that we can build on our stability and consistency and just feeling good and calm and at peace. So much happens in your brain when you go through loss. It's a chaotic state. And so our goal is to make everything back to structured as possible. So if you need to remove everything completely because it's too triggering, that's totally fine. Understand every day you're making progress. There's some things that you may want to remove altogether. And this is a touchy one, but I really do encourage people to think about the people in their lives. And I'm sure we've all learned when you go through loss, some people are helpful and some people just frankly don't have the capacity or the skill set or the bandwidth to be there the way we need them to be there. Especially suicide is a hard, ugly, heavy thing. And for a lot of people, it makes them very uncomfortable and they don't know how to deal with you. They don't know what to say. And so your job in that task is to recognize which are the people that are filling your tank and which are the people that are draining your tank or not really there for you in the way that you need. You need to actually sit down and think about this. I encourage people to take a week audit of this. And as you have conversations or you interact with people at your work or through your friends or your family, after the conversation, how do you feel? What bucket would you put them in? Are they somebody that you maybe need to reduce for a little bit so that you can regain your emotional strength? Is it somebody that right now they're just not giving you anything good in your recovery and you need to just remove contact with them for a season? Again, this is no judgment on them. It doesn't mean that they're bad people. It doesn't mean that you can't, restore communications later or have a relationship. This is just about you doing what's best for you and getting your own oxygen mask on. So looking at the people part of it and the relationships, that can be a tough one for people, and especially I've seen so much in families, it's just really hard. Everybody grieves differently. A lot of people may have conflicting, hard feelings about certain things, and it can just make it very tumultuous or very toxic. And so, at least for all of my clients, I try to impress upon the fact that your recovery is your responsibility. Trauma is not your fault, but your recovery is your responsibility. And so it's up to you and you alone to do what you need to do for your recovery, but you need to do that unapologetically because you're the one that's walking this out. So if you need to take a break from some relationships for a season, then go ahead and do that. And then lastly, we want to talk about what are the things that we're going to increase. So for you, this holiday season, again, depending on where you're at, maybe you do need to increase time alone. Maybe you don't want to be around as many people. I do really encourage people to not completely isolate, though. That's not a good idea to just go it completely alone. Keep yourself connected to some of those positive influences that you identify. Make sure that there's at least a couple people that you're checking in with, but there's nothing wrong if you just find that you need some extra time for yourself during this holiday season to rest, to contemplate, to do whatever you need. That might be something that you increase. I always recommend increasing anything that can bring you joy and laughter. There's this, idea that we can't have joy when we're grieving, or we can't laugh when we're grieving. And that's absolutely not true. And not only that, but laughter and joy is an accelerant to your healing. And so it sounds silly, but really, if you would make a point just once a week to watch a funny movie, or do, intentionally like go look for silly clips on YouTube or whatever, but laughter is some of the best medicine that you can give yourself, and that will do wonders for you. I mean, you may, depending on where you're at as well, you may decide that you want to increase your social activity over the holidays. Maybe getting out of the house is helpful for you, and it's comforting for you to be around other people. I don't know what's right for you. You know what's right for you. But the important thing is to create a plan and feel empowered by the plan that you create, to understand the plan that you're creating is helping you to move towards healing and health, giving you the best shot of making it through this holidays without losing your mind, right? And that you don't owe anyone justification for it. And then that you share that plan with somebody else and have somebody help hold you accountable and or support you in that plan. Because taking new steps and creating new boundaries is a hard thing, even when we're totally healthy and not in the middle of a trauma or crisis. So it's especially hard when you're grieving and you're going through this really hard time. To then try to create boundaries takes a bit of strength. It's not impossible, but it absolutely takes support. So I encourage you to find some support in holding up this plan, whatever that looks like for you. It could be a counselor, a coach, a pastor, a support group, whatever, but let somebody know about your plan and ask for their help in having you, make good on this plan. The last little tip that I do want to leave or comment about is be flexible with yourself. It's okay to just hold loosely to your plans. It's okay to, RSVP to a gathering and you wake up that day and you just realize you don't have it in you. Then be flexible with your plans. Nothing is set in stone or rigid. That's one of the gifts that I have from going through grief and loss, is I am way more flexible. I am way more flexible with my plans, my goals, my time. I understand that things are fluid and nothing is set in stone. And it's actually a much better way to live with this flexibility. But even if you go to an event, I always encourage people to have like a escape plan, that go there with, especially if you can go with someone else, and have some sort of signal that if it's too emotional, if you're overwhelmed, if you get in a conversation that is going sideways, literally like pull on your ear and have your person come save you. I don't know if any of you in your single days went on blind dates and you had that friend would call and save you from the situation. Have some sort of plan like that in place, so that if you do try something, you do go to an event, you do something and you find out it's too much for you in that moment, have a way to make a gracious exit. And again, don't feel bad about that at all. Like what we're all doing, it takes Herculean strength. Like it's like superhero strength, what we're doing. And so to think that we're just gonna, make cookies and open presents like nothing is, not really realistic. But we can still participate in the holidays in some capacity. We still can enjoy the season, or we can still completely skip the season this year if that's what we need to do. So that's my strategy for reduce, remove, increase. Any thoughts, comments, questions, Peggy?
Kelli, that is absolutely amazing. And some of the things is that, having that plan is so important. And then being able to have that exit strategy, because we get to that point where we break. And being able to realize and be gracious with ourselves and say, you know what, I've had enough and it's time to go. And, the ability to change your mind and give yourself that grace, because I think it would be better. I know I would. It's like, if I just don't feel like going, why would I force myself to be miserable in public with other people? And when it would be more comforting to be wrapped up in a blanket and having a cup of hot tea, and doing that self-care. So being able to change your mind is definitely that self-care and being nice to yourself when it comes to that. So I love the, the fact that you want to reduce, and that piece you mentioned about taking those people out of your life who aren't serving you. It's really difficult, but when you need to talk about your child, about your mom, about your experience, and they are the ones that are saying, you should be over it by now. Those are the ones, I mean, we're gracious with them and that they may not understand what's going through, but we also know that those are not the ones that are going to support us. And, frequently I hear people who are grieving who say, well, my sister isn't there for me. At the same time, we want them to be there, but we also have to understand that they don't have that bandwidth. They don't have that skill. They don't know how to help us. And unless you have the bandwidth to be able to share with them and just say, I need your help. And if nothing else, just come over and sit with me as I cry. Let me cry on your shoulder. I actually had a friend that didn't have much of a bandwidth except to listen literally to me cry. I would be driving home, I would be triggered, and I would call her up and just say, I need you to listen to me cry. And she would, and then I would get through that crying episode, and then we were able to talk about what triggered me. But I was able to directly tell her what it was that I needed, and not everybody has that.
Yeah. So half the battle is learning how to advocate for yourself. So the first thing is knowing yourself well enough to know what you need in that moment. Right. And then secondly, how to communicate that to the people that are around you. But even when you do that, not everybody has the capacity to be what it's so common with my clients. Like, we expect our support people before this happened to be our support people for this. And most times they're not, they can't. And it's very hard. And it's like adding injury to insult, that like the worst thing in my life happened to me, and the people that I expect to support me can't support me. So now I'm like left to figure this out on my own. So that's why it's so important to research and seek out and find support that is actually helpful. And I love what Karen said and what you're doing. And what I'm doing is coaching people who, I work with people who've been through similar losses, because for me, I personally didn't want to go to a counselor. I'm like, I don't care what your book says. I don't care what you went to school and learned in a textbook, and nothing against counseling. But just for me, I was like, unless you have been through what I've been through, you can't possibly know, and so it's so important. And that's why I think we need more of us that have been through things like this and have gotten to the other side to, number one, be examples. And then number two, show people the way. Because when it happened with my mom, I went looking for help. I went looking for support, and I didn't find it. I went to a support group where people were just commiserating, and I was in a tough place. It was like 6 weeks after my mom died, and I was just barely getting out of bed, and and I went there, and everybody in the room could understand my pain, which was so comforting. But everyone in the room was in the same condition I was in. And it had been months or even years for them after they lost their loved one. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I guess this is what life is just going to be. I'm just going to be sad and barely making it through for the rest of my life. And unfortunately, there's too many of that kind of model out there where people aren't actually helping you to move through it. They're just commiserating or sharing how much it sucks, which, it does. We know that it does. But in my opinion, and what I was desperately looking for was like, okay, tell me the things that is going to help me to get through this, and tell me the things not to do, or that's going to prolong this, because God knows I don't want to stay in this state longer than necessary. I want to find whatever I need to do to change this. And it's still there's not enough of us out here doing this, and there is a sea of people who are just so debilitated by grief because there aren't enough tools, in my opinion. So that's why I love these kinds of events, to just help spread the word.
Absolutely. So, we've talked about throughout the summit about those who are, grieving, and how do we get them that help? And then how do you offer them? So, if I were interested in working with you because you've lost your mom, and again, it's that uniqueness of having lost your mom to suicide versus child lost to suicide. Your son died by a drug overdose, and so people may relate to you a little bit more. So how would they get in touch with you, and what's your process in being able to give them that support that you didn't get years ago?
Yeah. So, well, my website is thegriefguru.com. I'm on all social media channels. I have a YouTube channel, which has a lot of helpful videos if you want to just get some nuggets and things like that. The place I usually recommend people to start is a bundle of tools we put together. So it's called the Grief Relief Bundle. So the website is griefreliefbundle.com. And it's the tools that me and the other coaches that I work with, when we're working with someone one-on-one, those are the tools that we use. So there's an assessment in there. There's a grief survival guide. There's a book copy of my book, You're Not Crazy, You're Grieving, in there. And then there's a 30-day grief recovery plan where it gives them a little nugget every day delivered to their phone for 30 days. And what that does is overview the 5-step framework that I use when I'm working with clients, which is called the grief relief process. And it's powerful. It's powerful. I'm here to dispel the myth that that you can't be healed or recover from grief. Healing is possible and available. And I would even say healing is possible and available in shorter time than we previously thought. It doesn't have to take years and years. What it takes is intentional, consistent actions and love and support. And so if you find the right actions and start doing the right things and putting those boundaries and all that kind of stuff, we're seeing tremendous results. When we work with clients in a one-on-one capacity, we take them through what we call our Grief Relief Accelerator program. It's a 10-week kind of intensive program. You're working with a coach one-on-one, but I'm telling you, it amazes me when I see the massive transformation that can happen to people in 10 weeks when they just set aside the time, come in and do the work, and put those things in place. It's amazing.
Yeah, thank you. Those sound like some awesome resources. And then it comes through, your experience. One of the things that keeps coming up in, as you've mentioned here, is how we grieve, and that society has set us up to not know how to grieve and how to support each other. So can you expand on that thought?
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to just clarify, even the word grief and grieving, if you come from a faith-based or biblical standpoint, there's a big difference between mourning and grieving. And we're actually called to mourn. And mourning is the external expression of internal grief. So grief is an internal condition. Grief is the thing that settles in your body and can actually keep you stuck. In the Bible, it's actually deemed as like a sickness. It's in your system. And so the way to resolve grief is mourning. Mourning is the external processing and expression of the person that you lost. And when's the last time you even heard the word mourning mentioned in anywhere? And we don't talk about mourning. We don't talk about it. So that's the first mistake we make. And then secondly, there's this idea, and it's so widely spread. If I had a nickel for every time somebody says you don't ever recover from grief, you don't ever move on, you just learn to live with it, or it never goes away, you just learn to live with it. We need to understand that even by saying that, we're setting ourselves up for failure. If you say, I'll never recover from my grief, then you never will. We need to understand that. This is the analogy I like to use. So I had thyroid cancer about 10 years ago, and I had my thyroid removed. And so now I don't have a thyroid. And for the rest of my life, I don't have a thyroid, and I'll have to take thyroid medication every morning. It would be like if I kept saying, oh, I never recover from cancer, I just learned to live with it. Cancer happened to me and it changed me, and so I'll forever now have cancer. No, that's not true. I had cancer. It affected me, it changed me, but now I'm living on the other side of cancer. It's the same way with grief. You've lost someone you love, it changed you. The person you lost is never coming back, but you absolutely can recover from grief and live this new forward-looking life that, it doesn't bring the person back, but you can be completely healed and living with joy, freedom, and all that kind of stuff. It doesn't mean that you don't ever miss them or you don't ever have a sad day. We're not talking about being delusional. You know, there's not ever a day I don't have to take my thyroid medication because I don't have a thyroid, but I'm no longer struggling from cancer. And so I think that's where we miss the mark. I think that we're describing it the wrong way, and it's setting people up to believe that healing or recovery is not possible. And that's just not true.
I totally agree with that, Kelly, because I see people say, I will never, ever, 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 ever get over this. And it's that mindset in which they tell themselves. And I think, you know, on the societal thing is that we have this expectation as a society that we only celebrate people and that we don't grieve, that we don't mourn, and that, you know, that we should be back to that normal in a matter of days. And it's just a short activity that those who haven't been through it, because we've lost that support. We have families that are dispersed across the country and across the world. And so we no longer have that support. We're not taught how to support people or how to process it ourselves, because it becomes that elephant. Death is that elephant, because people, you know, die, and we are afraid of it. But that's
it's
part
so
of that circle of
mind-boggling.
life. Yeah, but it's the circle of life. It happens.
It happens to everyone. It's like birth and death are the only commonalities that every person on the planet have. We all have those two things in common, yet we're so weird about talking about death or acknowledging it or having processes for it. I don't understand it, but yeah.
And that's where we come in, is because now as coaches in that grief realm, is that we are stepping in and helping those people who don't have those support systems.
Right.
And that's where, as a coach, we can offer our advice, our experience, and say, you know what, this is what we've been able to do. These are practical tips that we've gained. And this is what I found what's worked for me. And so I suggest that people, you know, because it's like you said, you break your arm, you don't hope that it's going to heal.
Right. You don't say forever, I'm dealing with I have a broken arm. Like, no.
You go to the doctor, you get x-rays, you get a cast, you go through that process of healing. And the same thing with grief is that there are people like us to help you through that. And you can make that decision in between counseling. And there are times when that's important and when it works, but explore your options and talk to people and find out what works for you, because everybody's unique in this journey.
Absolutely. Amen. I love it.
Any final thoughts with that, Kelly?
No, again, I thank you for putting this on. I think we could literally be having things like this every week, and, you know, people need to hear it. So I appreciate your time and energy to coordinate it. And my hope and prayer for everybody that's on or that will watch the replay is that you will find an increasing measure of peace and joy and laughter this holiday season and in 2022.